Buenos días a todas y a todos.
Good morning to all of you. And I'd like to say hello to those who are following us online. This is being streamed live. Dear Prime Minister Pedro, thank you very much for being here with us today in the wonderful city of Madrid. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for supporting our social democratic family at a key time for Spanish democracy. Tomorrow, the Congress of Deputies will bear witness to history, as it has done so often. They will see the clear failure of those whose political project looks back to the past. And it'll be the start of a new path for us to have a social democratic, progressive Prime Minister.
Querido Pedro, gracias.
Dear Pedro, thank you very much for your leadership and the excellent way in which you've governed during recent difficult years. We've said this several times now. These were difficult years, conditioned by various problems and situations, the pandemic, the war, inflation, which is a major problem for the most vulnerable families, and you have shown a commitment to social justice and have done everything possible when it seemed impossible. In 2018, you'll recall that you were told it was impossible to government with 84 members of the Spanish Parliament, and with your 84 members of the Spanish Parliament you restored dignity to millions of people. Then, later on, you were told it would be impossible to lead the first coalition government since the start of the Second Republic, but time has shown that with dialogue it is possible to move forward together, working for social values. When the pandemic came, you were told that it was impossible to pool debt in the European Union to protect jobs, pensions and investments. But your skill in building alliances made possible a recovery plan which saved millions of European families. And then when the war in Ukraine broke out, you were told that it was impossible to intervene in electricity markets to limit prices. But again, your negotiating skills showed that you can have a fair electricity market which is based on renewables, and there's no step back now from that. So, Prime Minister, you have us at your side so that the Spanish presidency can continue to lead in the major changes that the European Union needs, consolidating the social pillar so that our project can provide more social justice, the environmental transition, reindustrialization, digitalization, reforming the fiscal rules so that we can finally bury austerity and the many other challenges that we currently face at the European Union level. Dear friends, the alternative to our project, the Social Democratic project, is a retrograde one. Yesterday, the Popular Party said in the Spanish Parliament that what their project for the citizens of Spain was, which was to undermine the fight against gender-based violence, go back on what's being done to fight climate change, fight democracy, and undermine the protection provided to vulnerable collective groups. Now, Prime Minister, we've said it many times this week and also said it in the past. You are the hope that we have to hold back the extreme right, which we're seeing making progress right across Europe.
Y tienes, como sabes.
As you're aware, you have our full support, and we also know that we can count on you. In November, the Spanish Socialist Party Congress in Malaga will offer us the opportunity to continue providing solutions to all these problems. Dear Pedro, yesterday a group of members of the European Parliament had the opportunity to visit the Casa Labra. And you'll recall that that's where our party was founded. And you'll recall that you visited there after your brave decision to bring forward the elections in May. The Socialist Party was founded by 25 socialists, workers. These were people who represented the majority in Spain, doctors and other kinds of workers. And now, so many years later, our party continues to defend the same interests, the interests of the social majority, to build a better Spain and a better European Union, a prosperous union which is open and integrated, a union that is proud of its diversity, a union that embraces the rule of law, and a union that stands firm in the fight for social justice and against climate change, a union of tolerance and progress, where science guides our decisions, a union that we're going to build together. Prime Minister, we'll continue along this path together. Let me give you the floor.
Muchas gracias, Irache, y gracias.
Thank you, Irache, and thank you, colleagues. It's always an honour to be able to welcome meetings of the European Socialists here in Madrid, in Spain. And allow me to say it's a particular honour on this occasion. It's a particularly special time because something very important is happening. You have an opportunity to see the defeat of the Popular Party and Vox happening in Parliament live in real time. The electoral defeat of the PP happened on the 23rd of July. The consummation of this defeat is taking place this week, and you can follow it live. So, dear friends, today more than ever, welcome to a country that has a progressive coalition government, the first that, as Irache said, and this is crucial for Spain and Europe, and we're looking to repeat this progressive coalition government in just a little while. And this is a mandate from a social majority which freely expressed itself during the elections, in spite of the poorly intentioned and insidious suspicions that were launched by other parties on our electoral system, which was a model, as it always is. So this is the mandate of a majority that chose to move forward and not move backwards. They said yes to progress and coexistence, and a clear no to the derogatory proposals of the right wing, who are enthralled to the reactionary theses of the far right. On the 23rd of July, Spanish society launched a message of massive symbolic value. And I think that's clear to everyone here. The people of Spain clearly said to Spain, with their votes, that the far right is not unstoppable. It can be stopped. Further, in spite of the fact that the traditional right has thrown in the towel and has submitted itself to the far right, our voters showed that another path is possible, another future is possible. And it was here in Spain where their votes stopped this far right wave that we're seeing right across Europe. And what happened that day was one more episode in a large-scale debate, which is ideological in nature, but is also social in nature. And this is something that clearly affects our democratic institutions. It's a debate that's global in scope, which is also taking place in Spain. And what's at stake in this debate is conquest and progress that we thought consolidated. The essence of a democracy which is being called into question by the same people who stormed Washington in the United States and who stormed the parliament in Brasilia. And it's the same people who here applauded what was happening or simply kept quiet. They are people who question or try to tarnish the memory of Salvador Allende, and praise those who carry out coups, as we saw last week, from those who are the allies of the People's Party, the Popular Party. But I want to say to you, dear friends, that we Spanish socialists really felt your joy on that unforgettable night. Look, that night I got thousands of messages and calls on my mobile phone, as you can imagine, but the most moving messages were certainly those from European colleagues who celebrated the result as their own, because at the end of the day it was. Progressive Europe, Socialist Europe, but also many other Democrats who aren't part of our political family, but they were still watching what was going on in Spain very carefully. And this emotion came from something that the right wing will never understand, the invisible thread of fraternity that all of us have in Europe as progressives. And this is a fraternity that we learnt to cultivate far before the birth of the European Union or the world of multilateral institutions. So I'd like to thank you, because on that day you honoured the essence of our ideology. Democracy based on our socialist values and our pro-European values based on our internationalist values. So yes, we stopped the reactionary wave in Spain. That's what happened that night. And yes, we're going to stop it again next year during the European Parliament elections. And those elections will be decisive for the future of the European Union. Because what's at stake is the essence of a project that we contributed to forging as a beacon of freedom, democracy and prosperity. It's a beacon of hope, not only for the 27 member states of the European Union, but also, I'd say, for the world as a whole. Now, I know that we face a major challenge. We're facing powerful forces, not only in political terms, but also in economic terms, who fund these ideologies. And they're also forces that have no limits and no scruples, as we've seen during recent years. We've suffered here in Spain from that. These are forces that use fear, lies and manipulation to poison society with messages of hate. These are forces that preach denial, and they disregard science. In spite of going through the COVID pandemic, they still reject what science says about that. These are anti-European forces that reject what, for us, is the founding stone of the European Union, which is that Europe is, first and foremost, a community of values, not simply a supranational alliance. So the question that I'd like to raise in this intervention is, how have we reached this point? How is it possible that an ideology that we believed had been buried by history is once again poisoning our public spaces? And I think clearly we can find the response here in Spain, because the ascent of the far right has been made possible by something which we're also seeing in the discourse of the European People's Party. I mean, why are they spending so much time criticising the progressive coalition government in Spain? I mean, it's pretty obvious why. I mean, the fact that the far right has been able to rise is because the conventional right, the Popular Party, has been unable to resist the force of the far right. And through weakness and ideological weakness and through fear, they end up succumbing to the far right. They didn't hesitate for 1 second where they could make alliances with the far right. And that's happened in Spain as well. And now both forces govern together in various autonomous communities. We're a very decentralized country. We're very similar to Germany in terms of how our country works. But we have the Popular Party in coalition with the far right in hundreds of local authorities, and they don't care about the consequences or the price to pay. Their union is dangerous. They repeal the laws of democratic memory. They're cutting freedom. They're calling into question the symbols of a fight full of dignity, such as the LGBTI, that of the LGBTI collective. They're calling into question the existence of misogynistic violence. They're denying climate change and doing away with low emission zones, attributing them to what they're calling the ecologist dictatorship, the green dictatorship. Now this week, in the failed investiture efforts of the right-wing candidate, we were astonished to see the rhetorical complicity between the leaders of the PP and Vox. They're not hiding it anymore. It's now not about normalising the far right. They're taking on their arguments. That's what the centre-right is doing in Europe and in Spain. And the worst thing is who's paraphrasing who, I think. I mean, even in cases where they don't need to govern together, as is the case in Andalusia in southern Spain, where the PP has a majority, they're still trying to destroy some of our environmental heritage, for example. So we're seeing red lines falling away, with honourable exceptions. Discourse which is anti-European is becoming normal. They're against science, as I said, they deny science. They're against reason. They're against the memory of men and women who saved the dignity of our continent against other ideologies, when so many people simply looked the other way. So that's why today, like at other times in our history, it's up to us as social democrats to be far more socialist and far more pro-European. We need to be a bastion and a bulwark of the European ideal. We need to reaffirm, if that were possible, that rights and freedoms cannot be negotiated on. They can be defended. They need to be defended. You can't traffic in human dignity. The soul of Europe is not and will never be for sale. Colleagues, the world is, as you're aware, going through unprecedented changes. We're facing the consequences of a neoliberal model of globalization, the growth in inequalities between countries, and we're seeing that in the flows of irregular migrants that are reaching Europe because of a lack of opportunities in Africa, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we're also facing the challenge of the environmental crisis. We're seeing the fourth industrial revolution and the need to provide a human face to this digital transition that we're going through. And we're also seeing the triumph of feminism, and we want to see a definitive defeat of the patriarchy. And all these massive changes generate uncertainty and fear in large sectors of the population who are disconcerted by what's happening. And it's this that feeds the reactionary wave. And to deal with it, there's only one alternative: a social and democratic response. Social and democratic. So that's why, dear friends, we need to provide certainty in response to these questions. Every election that takes place in every corner of Europe, every national or continental vote, is one more chapter in the global struggle in which we're immersed. And that's the same thing as happened on the 23rd of June, and it'll be the same thing during the upcoming European elections. We're not talking about things that are happening elsewhere in the world. This is a global struggle between reactionary extremism and the pro-European response to the global challenges that all of us face. And this is something that conditions our political situation in our own countries. And that's why it's the main threat for the future and survival of the European project. So that's how things are now that the centre-right has simply raised the white flag to the far right. Social democracy needs to prevail, or the reactionary wave will impose itself, and that would be the beginning of the end of Europe as we know it. So, I want to send a message out to this right wing, which is weakening, if not doing away with, the firewalls that we have against the far right. And the right wing is now getting involved in climate denial, as we saw in the European Parliament with regard to the nature restoration law. And I can say to you, and I say to the centre-right, that the European social democracy will never throw in the towel to extremists. We are never going to be afraid. We're going to stand and fight the poison and hate that the far right is sowing in our communities. It's time for our slogan, Adelante, to be heard much more strongly than the retrograde slogans of the far right. We need to be proud of what we're doing.
We can be proud, you can be proud of all the work that you as the S&D Group have done. This has been so decisive, setting a route for this union. Look at everything you've achieved. A historic response, as Irache said, to the COVID-19 pandemic. Greater sustainability and equality as part of a wider transformation. Then support for the SURE mechanism, which was so important during the worst times, the worst months of the crisis. The extraordinary collective response of next-gen EU funds. These are achievements which have literally saved lives. Thousands of lives and thousands of jobs, thousands of companies from the most devastating consequences of COVID. And then the last was the crisis caused by the unjustifiable and unfair war of Putin against Ukraine. But all of this represents something more. It's symbolically important. You know, we've really changed the path. We've changed the future of the EU. It's a rejection of the policies which caused so much hurt and pain, which led to the unnecessary suffering of a whole generation. So these were politics that fed and fanned the flames of the extreme right and Euroscepticism. So all of these good policies bear the signature of this parliamentary group. So we can be proud of what you've done. And in the council, the progressive governments felt that you had our back, that you as MEPs were supporting us. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the work that you have done. And if you'll allow me, I know that what I'm saying is not just important to talk about achievements. We need to look at what else we're going to do from now on. So in order to do that, you can count on Spain. We, together with other nations, will lead the way. But we need the EU to be strong and united to drive this process. A Europe which bears the voice of the Socialists and Democrats will be decisive over the next 5 years. And if we're going to achieve what we want to achieve, there are two basic premises, two things we always have to do. One, we must always be there side by side with civil society. We need to understand the real problems of people, their day in and day out. The fact that they want is a fair salary. As Chancellor Scholz said, they want a fair salary, they want a decent standard of living. We need to allow young people to have access to public services and access to housing, because lack of housing is a major cause of inequality, particularly intergenerational inequality. So, when there is fear, we must respond with certainty, material certainty. So if someone feels that they might be excluded, then we must respond with organised solidarity, namely the welfare state. And just look what happened yesterday in the US. President Biden took up and took on the demands of workers from the automotive industry. And what are they fighting for? They're fighting for a decent salary. And this is the path that we have to follow. We have to ask questions. Why would you not raise the wage of a worker on the assembly line? Some say that that's not possible, but the CEOs are handing out bonuses of millions. So this is what the S&D is all about. We listen to the social majority. That's what we have always done. That's what we lend our voice to.
Porque esa fue la mayoría que nos apoyó para frenar.
This social majority prevented Spain from going backwards. You know, there are so many untruths swirling around, fake news, opinion polls that have been manipulated. And in the face of that, people took to the streets to defend what was so difficult to build. And they were fighting against regressive policies of the right. And these people, the people in the street, said, this is enough, basta. And they said, you know, these kinds of behaviours are over. That's what our Spanish female footballers said. They challenged this sexism, which is an inspiration for the whole world. So, like all of you, I believe that we have to trust in the social majority who we represent. And I know what the right represents. They don't have their own project. They don't have a true economic policy. We are the ones that are truly representing a majority. And that's why we have our own project. And if you've got a big energy company, we'll say, look, we will tax your windfall project, your windfall taxes. We did that in Spain. We taxed those windfall profits, and now the rest of the world is doing it too. So we are giving a voice to the majority. We're responding to their material needs, and we're doing that with pride and with determination and with peace of mind. Because it is common sense to represent the majority. They should never feel that their views are worth less than the opinions of the right and the extreme right. So that's why we should end speculation. We should be committed to policies that will change people's lives. Now, there are many transformations that are coming along, which will take patience, determination, and which will take years. If we're going to change the energy system in Europe, that's not going to happen overnight. Yet, we've started. This little seed has been planted, and it will bloom into something much bigger on this continent. And a lot of this is something that the right and the European liberals now accept. There are many right-wing and liberal governments in Europe who want the Iberian solution. They want intervention on the electricity market in their countries because they've seen what's happening in our country. They've seen what's happening with our electricity prices. Spain and Portugal are not less competitive, and we are able to soften the blow of the increase in energy prices. And that's because we intervened in the market. So the reform of the electricity market is a priority of the Spanish presidency of the Council. We want to reform the electricity market. Now, Margaret Thatcher used to say that economics is the method, but the aim is to change the soul of the nation. That's what she used to say. That was what one of the leaders of the neoliberal right used to say. And now what does the extreme right want to do? They want to radicalise and polarise so that they can drag us back into the past, so that they can stoke up fear and uncertainty in the face of the challenges that lie ahead. I don't want to change the heart and soul of Spain or Europe. I love it as it is. I don't want it to be what others desire. Second, we need to be courageous when it comes to striking a balance between our hallmarks as socialists, as we also strive to transform. So we need to have an ambitious programme that is realistic but ambitious. On many occasions, we've failed to be ambitious enough when carrying out change. But I think it's important that the S&D be ambitious, that ambition be in our DNA, but that we also offer hope and optimism against the monster and despair of the extreme right. Now, if we look at the failed PP candidacy, they are so divisive. They don't have ideas of hope and optimism. What were they selling? fear and frustration. They tried to pass on their own frustration and fear to society after what happened on the 23rd of July in the elections. We have to offer what we are, which is hope, optimism. We're a counterweight to bitterness, fear and hate. Now, as Irache said, we have a programme where we claim the European social pillar as our own. This was put forward by a socialist government. It began in Gothenburg and then it was built on in Porto by Antonio Costa. So we need to build on that pillar. We also need to acknowledge that housing is a fundamental right. We also need to ensure that parity in the workplace is paramount, and we also need to do away with unpaid internships and introduce a minimum living wage so that we can finally end childhood poverty. We need to have anti-poverty measures which are binding, and then we also need to reindustrialize our continent. I think we need to learn some serious lessons from the pandemic and what's happened with the war in Ukraine. Now, Europe needs to lead the way in a new era of prosperity. Our agenda must see the environmental transition as what it is. It is a challenge, but also an opportunity. It is not a threat. It must also be a fair transition where we do things better than we did in the past. Based on the previous economic system. Then we also need to count on our farmers, who are so important in rural areas. So we need to have a brave program which also encompasses AI and digitalization, but from a human point of view, where we really take advantage of AI and digitalization, but we also deal with the risks. So we need to come up with a democratic response where users are protected and where they can really make the most of their digital rights. So we have to have a program where freedom is front and center, where everyone can live and love as they wish, because that's what truly European is all about. Now, many of these issues will be dealt with in the informal European Council in Granada as part of the Spanish presidency. But of course, there are many other unanswered, unfinished debates. Of course, there's the issue of open strategic autonomy. This concept brings together two of our political maxims, namely a forward-looking industry together with Europe's well-being. And then we are also all about establishing alliances with other parts of the world, such as Latin America and the Caribbean. Then we must also defend our values in the light of migration. We need to finalize the Pact on Migration and Asylum. Today, there is a council meeting of Home Affairs ministers. I really hope that we will finally strike a deal on the Asylum and Migration Pact, because that is what European society wants, and we have to honour that. We need to strike a balance between solidarity and responsibility, which will strengthen the European system. But above all, we need to ensure that there is no longer a loss of human life in the Mediterranean. Finally, in Granada, next week, we will be opening up a space to talk and think about what we want the European Union to become in the years to come. What should the response to the various challenges be? The challenges of sustainability, resilience, and further enlargement, an issue which is on the table. So what does all this involve? And I'm drawing to an end now. Europe must decide where it wants to stand in the world. Will it be inspirational? Or will it just put up the drawbridge? Will we be a beacon of light, or will we be a fortress? Our Europe is a beacon of hope. Their Europe, the Europe of the right and the extreme right, teems with fear. Our Europe will always inspire. Their Europe is a nostalgic call for the so-called great times of the past. But if you think about it, those times weren't so great. I think we need to defend the Europe that leads the way, that guides, that is a beacon of hope. And it is a beacon of hope, not just for Europeans, but for the whole world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me turn back to you, because it's been 70 years since your parliamentary group was created, a group that you represent with pride. So it was back in 1953. Spain was still under a dictatorship, but there were socialists from 6 member states who came together, who pooled their strengths in a European Parliament which was a mere few months old. And that date reminds us of something. It reminds us how important, what a role our political family has played in Europe. We have put forward our dreams, our ideals, and our inspirations to the benefit of a united Europe. And we have brought about real hope. The EU, which responded so well to COVID and to Ukraine and is providing material relief. Well, all of that bears the hallmarks of the Socialists and Democrats. So we continue to be loyal to our principles. We are ambitious as we strive to achieve new goals, and we will never lose sight of the fact that we need to listen to the social majority. More than ever, they need us to be a useful instrument to improve societies and improve well-being and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Pues muchas gracias,
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your words of recognition and support of the work of the